Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm excited to be co-hosting this event today with the Care Lab, Black Girls Hack, and the Women in Cybersecurity Temple chapter. My name is Rachel Blyman. I'm a PhD student working in the Care Lab and serving as the student president of Temple's Women in Cybersecurity Club. With us today, we have Dr. Tessa Cole, who will be giving a talk titled The Cybercrime Link from Those Behind the Door, Incarcerated, to Those in the Free World. Dr. Cole earned her PhD in criminology and criminal justice from Georgia State University. Her work has been published in peer-reviewed publications such as Victims and Offenders and International Criminal Justice Review, with several forthcoming publications. She served a temporary assignment with the Department of Homeland Security Investigation, and as Director of Research for Street Grace, a 501c3 organization that focused on the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Specific to her area of research, she conducted studies on internet-based platforms such as Telegram, Discord, Monster, Indeed, and Seeking Arrangements, and analyzed the yield data from research studies to provide vital information to government organizations, such as the Federal Reserve Bank. She's taught various criminology and criminal justice courses, and currently she teaches and serves as a deputy sheriff in a major metropolitan agency in the Southeast, in an investigation unit focused on digital forensics and criminal enterprises. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Cole. Before I hand it off to you, I just want to let the audience know that we want this to be an interactive session. So even though the chat is disabled, we encourage you to post your questions using the Q&A feature. And with that, the floor is yours, Dr. Cole.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a really good introduction. I can't thank you enough. And as Rachel said, I am Dr. Tessa Cole, and I'm excited to have some time to speak with you guys today. I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along with a PowerPoint that I created about my topic. Can we all see it in the presentation view, hopefully?
Yeah, looks good.
Perfect. All right. So again, I just want to thank Temple University, specifically Dr. Rege, and then also Rachel for having me. Our friendship and collaborations go several years back. And so I'm always appreciative when they ask me if I'd like to share some of my research and experience. I've learned a lot from them, and I will continue to do so throughout my professional career. So I will always be grateful and indebted to them. So today I do want to spend a little bit of time to talk about my experience and also my research, which is twofold. Currently, as Rachel said, I am a deputy sheriff within a major metropolitan area in Southeast United States. And it's been really fun for me to put my research like hands-on. You know, I'm a practitioner. And so because of that, I've been able to see not just from like a research angle, but also within the free world, because my focus with my area of research, specifically in my dissertation, was cybercrime. So this is a little bit of a mixture, hands-on and then also research. So hopefully you guys enjoy this as much as I enjoy being a little geeky for my academic friends, and then also for my practitioner friends, hands-on. So. All right, so before we get started, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what I'll be discussing today. So when Ansel first talked to me about speaking, I was like, of course, I'd love to talk about what I do, right? But for me, everything is also incorporated with a cybercrime element. And so currently, right now, I focus on investigations within an investigative unit. And the majority of the crimes that I investigate, so I'm trying not to use the same word over and over again, but like investigate is kind of investigate, right? They have to do with digital devices, whether that be a drone, cell phone, emails, social media. Everything is very digital nowadays, right? And so I was like, how can I incorporate that within a talk, right? And then also have a broader overview for individuals that have not been incarcerated to understand how this crime works, and at the same time explain why it's so important to stop and have regulations for. So we will I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go forward. So an overview of what I'll be discussing is just the background and definitions of cybercrime and criminals, which I know is kind of silly, but when I started getting into my dissertation and whatnot, I realized how important it was to define topics so that like it's more understandable. And I say more understandable because I thought I understood a lot graduating or with a PhD, but I learned very quickly that that's not the case. I know a whole lot about a very little. My learning curve within my investigation unit has been a lot, which is great because I love to learn. But yeah, so that's why I'm covering some definitions, the institutional problems with cybercrime in general, especially as it relates to those behind the door. And when I say behind the door, I'm referring to like individuals incarcerated, whether they be in jail or a detention center or a prison. And then, so institutional problems, and that can be governmental, financial, and then also obviously there's a technological based aspect of that. And then I'll present some recommendations and conclude, and then we will have the floor open for questions. All right, so crime versus cybercrime. All right, so crime is behavior that's prohibited, right? So we all know that like murder is prohibited, it's bad, we shouldn't kill people, right? And then you have other types of crimes that are prohibited because they're prohibited, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're criminal. And I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here, but a perfect example of that is marijuana is illegal federally to ingest, but state by state, there's a different basis for that, okay? That being said, that's crime. Cybercrime are those crimes that are prohibited in the physical world, but online. So you have some kind of technological component, right, that you use to commit the crime. Now, cybercrime theorists for the longest time have tried to decipher or like break down like the two different types of cybercrime, because there's an argument among researchers that there's some crimes that are cyber dependent versus there's some crimes that are cyber enabled. Cyber dependent crimes, according to a lot of researchers, require a computer to be conducted, right? So like hacking, or like some kind of like tech support like scheme, right? Like, oh, or governmental scheme, like, hey, this is the government, through an email, like, give me all your money, okay? Those are cyber dependent crimes. Cyber enabled crimes are crimes that could occur in the physical world, but cyber criminals / criminals are using the computer to do so. So that could be like identity fraud, right? So I could go into a store and say, I'm my mom, and so I'm just going to throw out a name, okay? So I could say like my mom, Sarah Hammond, right? Okay, so I could go into the store and say, I'm Sarah Hammond. I want to remove money from my bank account, have a fake ID, all that kind of stuff, right? That would be a cyber enabled crime. Oftentimes today, having a fake ID would actually be sort of a cyber dependent crime, right? Because most people would use a computer to create the ID. However, again, that would be a cyber enabled crime because you don't necessarily have to have a computer to create a fake ID. Cyber criminals, we all know, use aliases, or let me back up. Criminals in general use aliases to conduct their crimes. I see it on a day in and day out, like work job experience, right? Whether that be them intentionally providing a false spelling or pronunciation of their name. Oftentimes criminals do that to avoid detection because they might have a warrant out on them out of another county or the current county or another state, and they don't want to be found out, right? So criminals in general will use personas so that they don't get caught for the crimes that they've committed. So just like they do that in the physical world, oftentimes cyber criminals do that in the digital world to avoid being detected while they're committing their digital crimes. But the reason why I bring all these like definitions up and break all this down is because I want to make it very clear. One thing I have learned in my job, criminals are criminals. They're going to use loopholes within the system. And I'm going to repeat, they're going to use loopholes within the system to conduct their crimes. Because how do people get off of charges sometimes when they've conducted a crime? They use the loopholes, or their attorneys use the loopholes, right? So with that being the case, the internet is a facility, facilitates the ability for criminals to use the loopholes, whether that be within policy, right? So we have federal policy that, and state policies, right? That have certain thresholds, which makes like stealing online, hacking into somebody's bank account, that kind of thing, right? Theft online, a felony versus a misdemeanor. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. But versus in the physical world, that threshold of price is going to be different. And in my opinion, researchers don't focus on these differences enough, and they need to. But part of that reason why researchers don't do that, in my opinion, is because they're not getting down to like the nitty-gritty of the definitions of what's a crime versus what's not. And like I said, attorneys, their job is to find loopholes, right? And so because of that, criminals have gotten really good, along with the internet legislation and just the internet itself, whether that be like tech companies, financial institutions such as like Cash App or Venmo, affording these criminals that right. So again, the big takeaway here is criminals are criminals, and they will use whatever loopholes they can use, which is more commonly than not now the internet that affords them that right to conduct their crimes. All right, so I'm just going to touch a little bit on stats. I like my stats, but just a little bit. We won't go too crazy. And this is just to show you. So the FBI IC3 is the FBI's Internet Complaint Center. Okay. And every year they publish a report of crimes that have been reported to them. For the most part, there are the prevalence of complaints, and then also the individuals that have complained about how much they've lost to that crime. So whether that be identity theft, bank account takeover, BEC, so business, account takeover, hacking, you name it. So since 2000, what's interesting, and the reason why I chose identity theft, let me back up a little bit, is because oftentimes in order to conduct a crime, you have to have some type of online persona, just like I was talking about the aliases, right? And so identity theft provides criminals, whether they're behind the door, in a cell, or in the free world, to conduct their crimes, because they have to have some kind of persona in order to mask themselves to avoid detection. So that's the reason why I chose identity theft to like highlight here, right? And so identity theft has remained pretty stable and increasing. Like some years, you might, as we see here in 2020, it was a little bit lower, and then it spiked up in 2021 with approximately 51,000 victim complaints in the yellow. And then in 2022, it dropped a little bit to around 43,000 victim complaints. But for the most part, it's trickling up. It takes some gaps when you look back through all the years. And if you're a little bit dorky like me, I like to keep track of this stuff. So like I do have all the annual reports of the IC3, the prevalence and the stats, and with the amount lost. But it's cool to follow to see like, are computer crimes, is it just a fad? Because there for a little bit, researchers were arguing, researchers that I was speaking to were arguing that, oh, well, the computer is just a fad, and here in a little bit, it's just going to even out with the amount of complaints and the amount of losses. But I present this to you to show you that although it does decrease and increase, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, it's steadily increasing, because I think back in like when they first came out with their original like annual report, you were looking at about 5,000 complaints. And to that point, I do want to remind everybody that there is a dark figure of crime. And what I mean by that is not every victim is going to report their crime. And that's pretty widely known within like the practitioners, that are in law enforcement every day. It's really hard often to have a victim come to court or even before court, right? Talk about their victimization. And because ultimately this is not just something that happened, it's something that negatively affected the individual that it happened to, like their lives. So these numbers are always going to be off, especially when victims are reporting. So I do want to like highlight that. That being said, we can also see the amount reported. So the 219 and then 278, both of those are reports and losses. So you have the amount of victims that complained and then also the reported losses. And these rates, in my opinion, demonstrate the problem that criminals, commonly exploit, because if you have someone's identity, you're often able to open up a bank account or, emails, you name it, so that whatever crime that you are conducting, whether that be you facilitating contraband entering into the county jail, which is frequent, or, the state penitentiary, which I think we all recently saw in national news, where there was a Georgia facility where there were, I think, approximately about 6 correctional officers that were having drones fly in to drop off contraband. So like criminals are using identities to help pay individuals to have contraband dropped off. So yeah. All right, so to get at my little slight at government, because I always have to go here with when I'm talking about like online fraud and cybercrime. Okay, so there's 3 different ways that I think about these institutional problems that allow criminals, especially criminals that are incarcerated, to conduct their crimes. So you have your governmental issues, right? So when I say governmental problems, I mean there's federal legislation against theft, especially online. Okay. There's also state statutes against theft, right? But they vary. So if you were in the physical world and you steal over $500, right, it could reach the threshold of a felony. Okay. But digitally, you have to hit 5,000. Okay. Which is where we go into the financial regulatory agencies, right? So most people think that the Fed and the FDIC are for us, right? But ultimately, they're really sort of not. They're for big business because they're not, those institutions are not actually they're not governmental agencies. They're agencies that have oversight and like help, right? They'll say like, hey, we noticed this. We're going to pay attention to this trend, or we're going to flag this, right? A perfect example of that is like the Equifax breach that occurred several years ago. Equifax like helped say, hey, like there are a lot of victims that were affected. They lost their social security numbers, which is great because they were able to like help those victims, right? But ultimately, they weren't really interested in going after the perpetrators. So having financial agencies that are like, hey, this is an issue is great, but where is their ability, like most law enforcement departments, to go after the perpetrators? Because they don't have the ultimately they don't have the ability to go and arrest. Okay. And then we get into the tech, which technology companies, in my opinion, highly exploit the gaps within the regulations to allow criminals that are, whether they be locked up or on the outside, right, to create accounts and then funnel their illicit funds through these accounts. A prime example of this would be how Venmo and Cash App and Apple Pay allow individuals to use like the prepaid cards to pay other people with. And we all know that prepaid cards are notorious for individuals to like have or to victimize others and then overtake their accounts and then apply to their account so that it's not tied to a actual like bank, right? Versus a Zelle requires you to actually have a bank account. And oftentimes, especially from what I have seen in my work, criminals don't, for the most part, have bank accounts because it helps them hide, the track and the flow of money, right? So most of the commonly used apps, like I use Venmo all the time, I use Cash App all the time, Apple Pay all the time, allow criminals to hide, behind a mask of anonymity. That being said as well, Apple is also notorious for not, which we're getting it a little bit into like Fourth Amendment, like search and seizure, like, privacy, which I'm all for having privacy. At the same time, there's an overbreach of that at the same, on the same end, right? So like Apple is notorious for being very difficult for providing law enforcement agencies with the tools after, hey, here's my search warrant, to have the information that they need to go after the criminals that are conducting crimes within institutions. So it's like if I tell you this individual shouldn't have a device, right, within this institution, I have a signed search warrant. Why are you being so difficult? Especially since that's like, that's a prohibited item, it's contraband. So there's that aspect with the user accounts. And then we have another aspect, which has been a really hot topic, like I just alluded to when it comes to like drones, right? So cell phones are a problem, obviously, because it affords individuals within the inside to talk to the outside about like, hey, this is the contraband I want in, this is what I want you to keep running. And when I say keep running, I mean like keep facilitating criminal activity on the outside while I'm locked up. So cell phones are a big problem, but drones are also a huge issue because oftentimes if the drone is not a specific brand of drone, which there's like one or two right now that I'm aware of, that sort of like play by the rules and like they will be picked up on certain like radars and stuff. If you're not one of those two, for the most part, you can kind of fly freely, even though it's not like, even though you have no fly zones, the technology aspect, it makes it difficult to, some people would say, shoot down the drone, which you shouldn't be shooting down drones. That being said, drones are a big issue because of that, and then also what they could be carrying on it, right? So if I'm flying a drone into an area, say a prison or a jail, I could drop off tons of things, right? What's to say that something like a gun's not dropped off? And so these are all safety precautions, right? That put individuals' lives, not just within the jail at risk, but also on the outside of the jail, right? So anyway, that being said, those are the institutional problems that are constantly, in tension, that need to be fixed, because if not, then what I am seeing, and I'm saying this right now from a qualitative aspect, what I'm seeing is criminals that are, well, the quantitative criminals that are exploiting the system, right? Then qualitative criminals that are behind the door, that are actually making more money than what they would make on the outside. So see. Okay, so going back to the technological focus, something I did want to highlight as well, that I have found pretty interesting is the cell phone aspect of all crimes, right? So communication is paramount to any type of crime, especially with incarcerated individuals. Just like communication is, paramount to individuals that are incarcerated that don't conduct crime, on the inside. Everybody likes to communicate, and communication is the one thing or aspect of a individual that is incarcerated life that they're able to have some kind of semblance to the outside world, right? Whether that be like communicating with, your daughter, your son, your family member, your best friend. So I'm not saying cut off communication completely, because that is pivotal in individuals' lives, pivotal in mine, pivotal in all, right? But there is a level of security that needs to be even more secured, I guess you could say. when it comes to communication. Cell phones will always be a big issue because they're not, I mean, I say they're not regulated, but they're sort of not regulated, even like from a day-to-day aspect, because we all can like log on to the dark web if we wanted to on our phones, right? And if we have the right like safety precautions, I say safety precautions. Well, yeah, safety precautions in place. So like if I have the right VPN, I'm probably not going to get hacked when I go on the dark web, right? Versus if somebody else doesn't, they're probably going to get hacked when they go on the dark web. That being said, SIM swapping, which has been was a bigger issue. I say bigger issue back in like a few years ago, but it's becoming even more of a big issue in my opinion, because people know it's an issue. Yes, there is two-factor authentication to prevent from this, and like other, aspects in place to help it. But when I saw the IC3 just now, like 2022 started accounting for SIM swapping, I was sort of horrified. I'm glad that they do, and like I don't want to like blast them for now like doing what they're doing, right? Because A, for effort for when you try, because I'm serious, like tech is very difficult to track and whatnot, right? But at the same time, with how much criminals use SIM swapping within their like enterprises in order to facilitate, like hiding from, I mean, ultimately all this comes down to is like I'm hiding my identity so I can continue on my crime, right? I was a little bit disappointed but happy at the same time. So and then devices / software products, like they protect individuals that engage in crime. So like I know I already talked about Apple just a few minutes ago, but Apple again, the software updates that they provide, and now more recently, like Android devices, newer devices with software updates make it difficult to extract the information that you need, or like, hold the information you need when it comes to like really heinous crimes. And that's very problematic when you have law enforcement agencies and even like, nonprofits that are actively trying to like help victims. And when I say help victims, I know oftentimes people think that individuals that are incarcerated, like their offenders are perpetrated. And for the most part, I would agree with that, except for there is always going to be people that are incarcerated wrongfully, and so going off of that, like if someone were to be attacked in a facility, and it was due to a cell phone or, associated with a cell phone or associated with a drone, that's not fair to that individual as well. So I don't look at, oh, once you're, incarcerated that you're forever, an offender, or like you don't deserve, justice, because surprisingly, I still believe in our justice system, but it's hard to do so sometimes with, the loopholes, right, that we have. But that being said, everybody does deserve, the right to justice, and to have devices and software companies that actively exploit just sort of like the archaic system that we have in our country is really disheartening. And also, before I forget, when it comes to a social media aspect, I do want to throw social media companies in there as well, because yes, we all have things probably on our social media and on our phones that we don't want other people to see. But I mean, nevertheless, like ultimately, if it has to do with a crime, considering we all know how data works, it shouldn't be that hard to, archive that data and not be difficult about helping individuals, receive their due justice and due process. All right, so with all that being said, I want to reiterate, crimes are not just within the jail or just within the free world. The internet and really affords crimes to collaborate, like crimes and criminals to collaborate from the free world and within like jails and prisons and boot camps and that sort of thing. The internet and tech and devices just make it easier for inmates to do this. And oftentimes it goes unprosecuted because the threshold is not as high as the threshold. Like when I say threshold, again, back to the financial, right, is not as high as the threshold within the physical world. So, excuse me, I think I said that backwards. The threshold within the physical world is lower, and then the threshold on the digital world is higher. And so it allows them to conduct more crimes, get away with it for a little bit longer, because law enforcement and other agencies and stuff may not pay attention to it, because you have these banking systems that are like, I'm just going to bypass, you know, that this account was hacked because it didn't reach the threshold to actually do a formal like theft. And one thing I think I forgot to say earlier is banks technically are not legally required to report unless the amount stolen from the account reaches a certain limit. So again, criminals, especially those, you know, that are very good, and there are very smart criminals, very, very smart criminals, when they, you know, come in contact with the internet and the tech and software to, you know, conduct their crimes, they're going to do it. And especially if they have all the time in the world behind, you know, a door, behind the jail door. So one thing, you know, I do recommend is for harsher punishments for those in conspiracies, and I mean including businesses. So if I know, you know, Cash App, or if I know Venmo is allowing this to go on with an account for X amount of time, knowing full well that John Smith, with a birth date of 5 years ago, has made, like, I don't know, 40 something $1,000 in 3 months, I think you probably should get in trouble for that, right? Because you just facilitated crimes, and you are the oversight. You're, you know, you're supposed to be the agency, right? The institution that is protecting not just the people that account could harm, you know, but also the other accounts that could be, you know, hacked or harmed as well. And when I say accounts, individuals. I also believe that uniformly sanctioning computer crimes, regardless of whether or not that crime is happens within a state. So if I'm, you know, victimizing my neighbor next door and I'm doing it on my computer, that should carry the same weight as if I'm victimizing somebody in Arizona, okay, and I'm in Tennessee. And then create appropriate laws instead of forcing personnel into like layer charges. And what I mean by this, and I didn't experience this until I started into my investigative role, is oftentimes the crime, there's not legislation that like fully like gets at the tech crime, or, you know, the digital crime. So right now there's a statute within Georgia that covers contraband crossing the I say either because it's actually two different like code sections, but the jail or the prison like guard line. And it's unmanned aircraft is what it's called, right? And so I'm glad that we have that in Georgia, right? You know, because we shouldn't have like drones flying guns, you know, over the guard line. And I'm not saying that drones are flying guns. This is an example. But my point in saying this is oftentimes you have to pick out certain things to make sure that the crime is covered, versus there being a crime that says, hey, if you use any type of financial account to help someone that's behind the door conduct their illicit activity, you're going to jail, you know, which I know is like very like straightforward and straight to the point with like, you know, the financial aspect, but sometimes that's what we need. And I think sometimes legislators, they forget that like sometimes crimes are just what they are. You use your account to conduct, you know, use your account to facilitate financial means for an individual that's locked up that shouldn't have a cell phone, and that's that, right? So I guess with that recommendation is just get to the point, right? So but yeah, that being said, that is the gist of what I wanted to talk about. I know sometimes I get really excited about like the research aspect and then also the practitioners. I'm hoping that I consolidated both of them, just so that you guys can see like all of this goes hand in hand, right? You know, with the stats, we can see this is, you know, still a pervasive problem. It's going to probably continue. And so because of that research aspect, then the practitioners, you know, they need help as well to combat against this, because it doesn't just affect people behind the door. It also affects the people on the outside, because ultimately, without all those things in combination, the crime could not occur. So. Do you have any questions or comments? Let me stop my share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. That was really, really fascinating. So we're going to move on to some questions. I'm going to start it off, and I was just wondering if you could speak more about your role as a deputy sheriff and, what exactly it is that you do there, like your kind of day-to-day duties, tasks, what kind of stuff do you do?
Yeah. So I right now I'm in jail investigations, and so I love my position there. My main focus has been digital forensics. So I look at a lot of like data from cell phones that have been extracted. And it's funny because I was joking with my mom the other day. I was like, I think I know more about some of the, offenders and like their loved ones than I know about some people in my own life, because people are just so vulnerable, on a screen. Like, it's funny the things that you're willing to share, right? Through a screen versus like in person. But I think that's just today's time. But so I do a lot of digital analysis of data that's been extracted. And then I do a lot of search warrants. I thought I was going to get away with not having to write as much. I was like, if I go practitioner, I'm not going to have to write as much. And I'm gonna be honest, like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should go back into academia so I don't have to write as much. But so I do a lot of those. I've done arrest warrants. It's sort of just like, it depends on like the case, to be honest with you. Because sometimes you have cases where it's just like one individual, right? That's not in a network, that's violating a law. And then other times you have cases where there's one I thought I was gonna pull my hair out with because it was just so intricate. Like a network. And each time you're like, okay, well, this is done. You're like, nope, another search warrant. So it's a lot of writing, but I like it because it's a lot of like connecting dots. That being said as well, I have also had to work a floor. And when I say work a floor, I mean I've, been on a jail floor. So where, you're in contact with inmates and it's not coming to ask them questions. It's, the shift, that, detention officers, have, deputies have. So that's it. To me, that helped me in the position that I'm in, because I understand like, okay, so I sort of like getting yourself in like an offender's mind space, I guess you could say. Like, I understand how this works, on a daily basis. I understand why this would occur, so that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you. All right, and we have some questions from the audience. So let's see what we got. How long does it take to extract data from iPhones? You said Apple isn't much help with the investigations.
Yeah, so I don't do the like extraction itself. There's somebody else that does that, because the unit I'm in sort of sits underneath it's sort of, so like there's, criminal the CID. So you have your criminal like investigation, big umbrella, right? And then jail investigations is a smaller unit. That being said, there isn't a captain that takes care of that. I just, when everything's dumped and there's just a bunch of mumble jumbo, that's what I do, right? But I will say too, to that point, I have extracted phones at Homeland Security, which I love my internship there. My mentor was awesome, Mina. That I did, had the ability to like extract and everything. So I've done sort of like everything, but my day to day is, making sense of the mumbo jumbo. That being said, Apple makes it very difficult, very, very difficult. So if you don't stay up to date on your software, it's a little bit easier. But if you stay up to date on your software, if you have passcodes, which these are all things that I encourage people to do, because you don't want your data stolen by other people, right? So it's a twofold, right? So you need it, you want it, to help yourself, but at the same time, criminals exploit it. So there's got to be some kind of happy medium, and Apple knows that happy medium, and they just sort of refuse to help. Yeah.
All right. So related to this, there's another question from the audience. They said, in discussing the delicate equilibrium between privacy and protection, particularly in the context of iPhones, in your perspective, what constitutes that optimal balance? How do you envision this balance manifesting to safeguard both privacy rights and security concerns effectively?
It's a great question. So I think this also falls on law enforcement as well, because I know that law enforcement more recently has gotten a bad rap from a few bad apples, because I know that there are a lot of law enforcement, agencies and agents and officers that do the right thing. And we always see in the news, like, oh, police, brutality or misconduct and that sort of thing, right? And that is there. I'm not going to take away from that, because that's a lot of what my unit also looks at, right? Is, officer misconduct and that sort of thing. That being said, officers have to and agents have to be very careful about, what they are saying is, appropriate, or what their probable cause is, right? That sort of thing. Because without that, then Apple's not going to want to give them something when you're saying this is murder. This is murder, right? And so I understand it from Apple's point of view. Like, we have so many individuals, right, misuse and abuse the system. So we're not going to give it to you unless you prove it to us. At the same time, though, like, probable cause for a search warrant is different, right, than being sentenced to prison for murder. And so I think it's an ego thing from both, right? It's an ego thing from like private institutions like Apple, or private, entities and businesses like Apple. And then also you have your governmental entities and, smaller organizations and police departments that, as well, ego. So I think if there's some way that they can merge, and eventually they're going to have to, because if not, we're just going to see more and more victimization. And I honestly think it's going to get very ugly here pretty soon, because of what I have already seen. And then also, like, even prior to like having, this position that I'm in, like my own like research and, like on Indeed and all that kind of stuff, like there was a time in my dissertation data collection, right, that, there was one of the people were talking to my sock puppet, right, and was saying, oh, please come over here, and it's clearly human trafficking, so I mean, like, if we want to fight crime and make the world a better place, there has to be a meet in the middle from both parts. So that's what I think it's going to take, is both sectors being like, okay, let's come together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough balance to find. All right, so another question. Have you heard of any recent cases involving criminal use of AI? And related to that, where do you think we're headed with AI and deepfakes and how it relates to this topic here?
So, yeah, I see it actually on a pretty like normal basis, because I mean, if you really think about it, like anything that you use to edit like your photos is AI, right? So oftentimes, and this is not meant to be funny, but sometimes I'm like, who is this? I don't think we work with this person. And several times I've been told, no, this is so and so, and it's because of the AI they used. And that's fine, right? But like, that's AI. Like, you changed your features. Like, there's no way that, like, I saw you in person a few days ago. Like, I'm just gonna be honest. Like, and same with inmates. Like, there's no way. There's no way. Like, so it is what it is. So it makes it harder to identify, right? That being said as well, my master's thesis was in revenge pornography, and I've seen a lot of great steps that have come from state statutes, addressing revenge pornography than there were before. But one thing that those state statutes don't cover is, deepfakes and, those being used for harassment. Yeah, we're going to see a lot more of it. It is going on. It's not really reported, because oftentimes within state statutes, you'll find that in order for someone to be deemed a victim, you have to be able to say, this is my body part, right? So I think in like one of the I want to say like Tennessee, you have to be able to be like prove like, hey, like this is like the mole on my leg, which I think is like absolutely incredibly horrific for victims, because not only are you having to retell your story, but you're then having to identify yourself. And then take it a step further, what we know from like child pornography research or child abuse images, and I like to refer to it as child abuse images because each time that image is shared, the person is, re-victimized, right? We know that like those victims emotionally and psychologically are far worse, according to research, than individuals that have been just victimized within the physical realm. And that's because their photos, each time they're shared, it's another victimization. So yeah. Sorry, hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay. So the previous question I'd asked about, finding the balance between privacy and security, there's some follow-up to that. So um, some questions related to that. Is the capacity lacking for both of those sectors to come together? And what incentives do you think are needed for those sectors to work together?
Excuse me. So yeah, I think the capacity is lacking, especially among law enforcement. Um, when you're looking at like law enforcement agencies in general, I think we all like know that most of them are hiring right now, and that's because a lot of them have had a lot of either like early retirements or turnovers because people get exhausted. It's emotionally like draining, and it's just a never ending cycle, right? Crime's always going to be there. So they always joke and say, if you go into, law enforcement, you always have a job. But that being said, at the same time, on the same token with, the private sector, with tech, I don't think that they really struggle with resources. I don't think that Apple is really like struggling. I mean, I've heard of some companies even offering, wine, like there was a job I was looking at that offered like wine Wednesday and something else during lunch hour. And then there was another one that I have a friend that like she really wanted, she didn't get, but like they like offered beer like in their cafeteria. And so like my like perspective of that is like I don't like, obviously like not everybody wants a stressful job / not everybody's called to a job in law enforcement, right? But if you're drinking beer, right, at lunchtime or like having wine, which I'm not like sliding at all, but you have to wonder, like, are you really that stressed out or can you give a little bit more, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So what steps are being taken in today's world to help mitigate online contraband with incarcerated people?
Yeah, so there are some steps. Some of them I won't talk about just because we're fighting an uphill battle. But other ones are I would say one of the biggest is going through the data, right? And I did not realize how important data would be. I mean, I knew it was going to be important, right? If I took like, the practitioner like aspect and like field route, right, with my life, but I didn't realize how important it was going to be. I have found myself being very overwhelmed with the amount of data I'm sitting on. And the reason why I say data is because oftentimes, like I said before, people communicate. The whole purpose of having a cell phone and all these different types of things is to have some type of communication or interaction with the outside world, whether that be on Netflix, Hulu, texting, WhatsApp, or whatnot. The whole purpose of it is to have a connection. Sometimes that connection is a robot, right? Text app, that texts you back and says, how are you feeling? Other times that's with like, FaceTime or like a video call, right? And then other times it's just I'm gonna veg out and watch TV, but those are all still connections. It's a human aspect relationship, right? So those are things though that data wise, it's a lot. It's a lot to go through. And even if you just had one phone, right? Let's say that I worked at a facility and we just got one phone in 6 months, the amount of things you could do to figure out like, hey, what are in like individuals that are incarcerated, struggling with that kind of thing, it's incredible. But imagine having like 100 phones, right? it's incredible to figure out like, okay, these are what, I mean, it's sort of like what they do with like trends with like kids when they give them like surveys, like what the, the adolescent study, the youth, you kind of figure out like, okay, well, for some reason, like the last 5 years, kids aren't wanting to smoke weed, they're wanting to drink. So the contraband that comes in, the biggest and the best is digital devices, because you're not only able to figure out like the big players in the game of, criminals that are facilitating the crimes, right? But also like how they're perpetrating them, the victims, how it's affecting them, and the overlap, right? Because it is impossible. It's impossible for these crimes to occur without someone from not behind the door bringing stuff in. It's just impossible. So you've got to have bad actors, and those bad actors aren't just officers. They could be drone drops, right? They could be, people dropping stuff off in the parking lot, attorneys, attorneys. Gotta love them. Grateful for them, but attorneys, like there's a reason why they know the loopholes.
Speaking of the loopholes, someone asked if you've spoken with defense lawyers and what's their stance on finding loopholes in the system. They said it sounds like they can be the bad guys too at times.
Yeah. So again, I'm very grateful for attorneys. Very grateful. Okay. Own personal life. Grateful for attorneys, right? But no, I don't really appreciate attorneys, if I'm being completely honest with you. I don't. And I would say that for the prosecution as well. I think both are always trying to argue like their point of view. And sometimes people they forget the end goal, right? And the end goal is like some sort of like justice or like reconciliation, for the victims and those that, have been negatively affected by the crime. Because if there's no crime, then there's no victim, right? And then we don't need to be here. Okay, ultimately, right? But that being, I don't really, and I'm not trying to be negative towards attorneys, because again, I appreciate them. I know that we need them. They've been great, but I do think that sometimes being right is not always like what's important. Sometimes it's just doing the right thing, and that can be lost, especially when you have a massive caseload. And that's, I go back to like, I don't blame them, but I do with prosecution, and then I don't blame them. I really, really do with, defense attorneys, because defense attorneys are good. They're really good. So yeah, it's a mixed relationship, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's tough. Okay, so there's a few questions about your career and law enforcement. So starting off, can you speak about your least favorite and your favorite part of your job? And perhaps, the most challenging aspects for you in your career path?
Mhm. Yeah. So my favorite is like the actual like investigative portion, right? Like with the data. My favorite's when I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And like the data just makes sense, right? So I love like, it's sort of like, figuring out the clue. And I think, and I love doing that, especially with my unit, right? So I work with some really great people. Some people that have really like mentored me. I wouldn't be the sheriff that I am today without them. So like I'm very, very grateful for those relationships. Um, so I love that, like the team aspect. And I think that's one thing within academia that I was missing. Like I do like, and I'm gonna shout out to you guys real quick. So if it wasn't for Onzel and you, like I probably wouldn't have made it through my PhD. The investment that you guys made into my life, and just everything, like I cannot thank you enough. And like I really appreciate that. I hold that dear to my heart, and I hope to continue to do like collaborations and whatnot with you guys. Um, I I think with my unit, the reason why I hold that so near and dear to my heart is because of like the team aspect. So like those um collaborations we have, like having that on a daily basis within my unit, if that makes sense. So that's probably my favorite. And I think that's probably a little bit of my competitive side as well, because I played competitive soccer growing up. So I think that like me loving soccer and me loving the team aspect is where that sort of merges, in my daily like life and like work. My least favorite is when I have to go into the actual like county jail or any type of correctional facility. that like I've never smoked weed before in my life. I don't ever want to. And I've realized the older I get, the more sensitive I am to like smells and scents. And I can't. I'm sorry. Like that's the least favorite is just the smells. And I know that's probably petty, but like there's just some smells you just can't, you know? So there's that. And then the hardest thing I think that I deal with currently right now is leaving the job at work. And I know like I'm able sometimes to like do work from home and that kind of thing, which is great, right? Especially like I go in and I do a normal like shift and like I do normal stuff. But I'm allowed to like do overtime sometimes, you know, which is great from home because then it's like cut out the driving, that kind of thing. But sometimes I need to turn it off, and it's not good to just always be working. And so that's my biggest struggle is turning it off, and then also like allowing myself to like go back into like my research questions and that kind of thing. Cause I have tons of research questions, which it's been great, right? You know, since, you know, being in the field, and it provides, you know, a lot of like, it gives me a lot of ability to be like, these are things I want to explore, but I can't explore those if my mind's always running about like this case, that, you know. And so the separation, I guess you could say. And then also there's like an aspect of the job where it's going to always affect you, right? Like even if you don't want to admit it, or even if you don't think at the time, it's affecting you. It does. There's something to be said for like people that you know going to jail, right, for doing criminal acts, or like, you know, seeing certain things, right? You know, you can't ever take that back. But so yeah, just the separation I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, I imagine that can be hard. Um, can you speak about how you or anyone, I guess, can get into law enforcement or law enforcement career? You know, what kind of training needs to happen for that?
So I actually get a lot of like not like slack, but I don't know, I'm trying to figure out the word. But so long story short, when you're looking at like deputy sheriff or like police officer, like the requirement for that is high school like diploma or a GED. So I recommend that you like complete, you know, that, you know, basic requirement. And then also spend some time. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but spend some time um being, if you're in a county, most of the time you're going to start off in the county jail as a detention officer. Some of the really good experiences that you can learn from that is like communicating with others, right? And like others from different like backgrounds. So I recommend not pushing those things aside because your end goal might be FBI. If your end goal is FBI, maybe you need to start in other areas, like, you know, a county, you know, county sheriff, or, you know, like, you know, your local PD. So be willing to like take whatever comes first to get your feet wet, because where you start is going to teach you a lot. Because I know that the area that I'm at, people say that 1 year where I'm currently at is like the equivalent to like other departments like several years. So I've learned a lot. And then be like moldable. Like I know that I do have a little bit of like a strong-willed personality. So don't lose that while you're like working. Don't allow yourself to become complacent, because I see that happen far too often with people that like, I was like, you were just gung-ho 6 months ago and now you're just kind of like, so just always stay hungry.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, let's see what else we have. So someone asked, are there defense mechanisms or practices to help defend incarcerated facilities from drone drops?
There are, but because there's so many different technological devices not created with the United States, and then also individuals receiving them, modifying with them, it makes it really, really difficult to do so. I will say that like the FAA has ways to like, you know, combat against this, but the FAA is a federal organization. And so oftentimes they're more focused on planes in the sky, and I don't blame them. Okay, we need you to, you know, pay attention to people in the air flying, right? But it makes it difficult because of like the cost and also just the modifications people can make with drones. But I'm telling you right now, drones are going to continue being an issue, and they're going to continue putting people in danger and probably getting people injured. So, and that's not just within a correctional facility, that's, I mean, schools, you name it, right?
Mhm. Okay, and then another question here. This one's a little bit longer, but I'm just going to read it out. So, you mentioned that federal agencies like the FTC primarily serve the interests of businesses rather than the average citizen. In cases where individuals experience financial losses below the thresholds typically addressed by financial institutions, which institutions or entities possess the capability to provide support and recourse for these individuals?
So this is kind of an interesting question. So it depends on your age bracket, which is horrible, right? So the FBI's IC3 has a group that specifically helps elderly individuals. So I think their age limit right now is like, I want to say 60 and older, because I want to say 60 and older. So if you report to them, then they will database it. Then they also get you in contact with your local PD or sheriff's office. And they work with your bank to remedy that, right? Now, if you're not within that category, this is where it gets weird. If you go into a police department, which I recommend, if any money is stolen from you, I don't care how much, right? Because I'm a little bit that petty person, but it's not just me being petty, it's me looking out for other people, because if I don't highlight it right, then that person can go on and do this to 100 other people without being caught, right? Because they were underneath the threshold. So I recommend everyone go in and write the police report, write the incident report, right, that happened, and submit that and have that on file. Because one, what that also does is, let's say that happens like 5 other times to you, you're establishing a paper trail with your bank, right? Because you can say, hey, this is where it was taken, here's the information that I received from my bank, that this continues happening. And then also it highlights, hey, your bank might be doing something else. It might not be like a cyber criminal. It might be somebody within your bank, right? Just sending out emails saying, hey, you know, like you've been hacked, and really it's them taking money. So the biggest thing, the options are slim, but the starting point with all those options are reporting. And because again, the elder abuse requires reporting as well, right? So they can't just, for the most part, they can't just go off of, you know, here's a bunch of accounts of like people over 60. So, but yeah, so you're going to report to IC3, that unit. And there's other, like, you know, avenues and assistance, but I mean, they're really like slim pickings compared to how big of the problem is that, you know, within the United States.
All right, thanks for that. And another question here, how do you see fraud come into play within your current types of investigations? Do you see inmates actively defrauding one another or conducting online fraud operations while incarcerated?
Yes. Yes. And what's also been pretty, like, I say cool, but it's not cool. I say cool, like excited, because it's like, you know, the research side of me. So when I first started researching like online fraud and was conducting my own like analysis and like sort of thing on Monster and Indeed and Discord, I found there was a lot of, especially on Telegram, I found there was a lot of aliases that are very similar to gang affiliate, what you would see, right, in gangs, aliases that I'm seeing now within the county. And I've gone back and I've looked and I've realized that, like, yeah, that most of the enterprises that were doing very well on some of the Telegram channels I was sitting on are definitely gang, like they're gang, okay? They're just gangs, just, you know, funneling their money through. Yeah, they defraud each other. They defraud other people for accounts, because I'm not sure if it's like commonly, like, if y'all know, but like with Cash App, there's only a certain amount of money that you can transact, right? If you don't verify yourself with like your social security and that set type of thing, right? So they fraud, especially if their account has been locked down, in order to, you know, release the funds. And oftentimes these funds are like a significant portion, amount of funds. And if they don't defraud and steal other people's identities, then they can't get their money out. So yeah, so they're defrauding each other. They're defrauding like each other within the jail. They're defrauding each other within their, their gang or, whatnot on the outside. I mean, there's always some level of fraud needed in order to cash out, because I mean, we all know that like money mules and that kind of thing. I mean, like, even if they're like saying, hey, I've hired a B and C person to go down and get gift cards so that we can get this money out, or we can funnel this through, that's still someone that you're using as a money mule to defraud. Right? So every aspect of it is fraud. Just about.
All right, thank you. And as one commenter said, all your responses have been very helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and talking today, sharing your knowledge. It's really great getting this expertise from someone on the inside. So I just can't thank you enough for coming and speaking. And thank you to everyone in the audience for coming out today as well.
Thank you guys for having me again. I always love talking to you guys, and I can't thank you enough for, the investment and the just the help and everything that you guys have been for me. So I'm really very, very grateful for Temple University and the relationships that I have with you guys. So
You deserve it all. Thank you so much again. And everyone is pouring in their thanks. With that, we're going to close it out. Thanks, everyone.